Welcome to the second episode of Debt Talk podcast with your host, Ripon Ray. Many couples are focusing on their financial position during the cost of living crisis. The tension of high cost would manifest in emotional and financial strain in many relationships. Many would no doubt share their personal space with discomfort, which is a perfect recipe for the rise in domestic abuse. Already, lawyers are warning that spiraling energy bills and rising inflation fueling sharp increase in divorce inquiries. In this episode, we speak about domestic abuse and money trouble during the cost of living crisis. I have a panel of speakers who are to share their personal and professional experience on Debt Talk to navigate such a delicate subject along with tips in the end. I have Rosie Lyon, a domestic abuse sufferer and a campaigner. James Jones from Experian, one of the largest consumer credit reference agencies in the UK. Shurina Ali, Advice Manager from Limehouse Project, which advises and supports vulnerable communities in the East End of London. Let me start with Rosie. Rosie, you have been courageous enough to speak in public about your personal experience of domestic abuse. Could you tell us what actually happened to you?
Yeah, I experienced domestic abuse. I was in a relationship from the age of 17 for 7.5 years. I didn't realise it was domestic abuse until later on, and when it became physical, um, which is obviously a myth that domestic abuse isn't just physical. But the main thing that I speak about a lot is the post separation abuse and the aftermath that I experienced. I had a joint mortgage property with this individual. I got a mortgage when I was 22 years old. And after we broke up, I had to leave the property for my own safety. And then it was the battle of trying to put the property up on the market. So I tried to reason with him to try and get it put on the market, but he kept making excuses. And then obviously, when it got worse, the police had to get involved and the courts. I had a solicitor that wrote to him instead, and we tried to get the property put on the market, but he refused to sell, pay, or leave. It was very, very difficult for me. I even offered him to have the whole equity of the property just to get it on the market to sell it. But unfortunately, he did refuse. I was paying the mortgage in full for just over a year, even though I wasn't allowed to access it. And I had no other option but to let the mortgage go into repossession, and let the bank take it, which is what I talk about a lot now because of the poor experiences that I had in the banking industry when that repossession was taking place.
At what point did you realize that you reached a dead end and you needed a solicitor?
I knew that I needed help from a solicitor when post separation abuse took place. Like after I'd left the relationship, about 3 months later, I had to go to court to get a non molestation order, which he breached and he got charged for. But obviously, I wasn't allowed any contact with him. Not that I'd want any for my safety, so I had to get a solicitor involved to be the middle person anyway, and to get a bit of advice. Really, I was paying it all in full, and it couldn't go on like that for years and years. But unfortunately, the only option we did have in the end was to stop paying because the only other option was to go to court and fight it, but it could have cost over £15,000 just to get the court to say that I could sell it without his permission. Money that not many people have.
Based on what you have told us, no doubt you're going through a financial strain. Was there any other strain, such as emotional stress, psychological stress?
Yeah, I really did struggle emotionally. I'm someone that needs constant reassurance, and I think quite a lot of people that have been in my situation will feel the same. When you go through it, and especially if you don't have much of an understanding at the start of what's actually happening, you feel like you're the only person going through it, and it's a really lonely place. I struggled to leave my home due to anxiety and depression, just because that individual lived around the area as well, the same area as where I live. So I struggled from 2019 up until around the end of 2021, where I just, and it's very difficult going through that, waiting for solicitors to email back, and then you get that triggering sense of, oh no, like you don't know what's going to come next, and it's all the anxiety, the panic, the waiting for the court hearings, and it's just the emotional impact it has on people is horrific.
You briefly touched on being in contact with a number of agencies. What sort of challenges were you coming across as you approached these organizations?
Yeah, I think with the sort of support wise, from say like different charities, like local charities, councils, it's very much in my area where I live, which is in Essex. It's a postcode lottery, as such as they call it. So you go to one and they'll say that your area is not covered, so you have to go. They send you somewhere else, and then you'll tell your story again, and then no, that's not the right place again. You have to go there again. So it's the constant. And then at the time in 2019, it's got a lot better since, but some sort of support work that you get assigned to you depending on your location. It depends who you get really to whether it's good. I experienced poor service and support from one area to another area where I experienced really good support. So it depends on the areas. And in the banking industry back then in 2019, nobody really spoke about domestic abuse. It wasn't like, there was nothing on banks' websites. I think maybe just like one high street bank, and definitely wasn't my high street bank. And so you'd ring up and you'd have to retell your story constantly to a different person, even though you told them before, and they're so you keep retelling your story. It's re-traumatizing, and then they just come to an end. There's nothing that they can really do for you, and it just feels like you're in a never-ending cycle.
Thank you, Rosie, for sharing your experience. Now, James, a credit reference agency holds financial data of individuals in the UK. Now, when we come across a situation like Rosie, in what way can a credit reference agency help?
Well, firstly, Rosie, it's upsetting to even just, as a third party, listen to you tell the story of your experience. I can't imagine the kind of stress and upset and as someone you experienced at the time and as you described for a while afterwards as well in relation to the whole episode of domestic abuse. Um, I mean, obviously, if there's sort of credit-related fallout from this type of experience, then that sort of spills over into the work that we do as one of the country's main credit reference agencies, because one of our jobs is to maintain a factual record of what credit people apply for and take out, and how that is subsequently um, managed. I'd like to say that we at Experian, we put the consumer at the heart of everything we try to do as a business, and make it one of our missions to promote good financial health, and that includes, obviously supporting the most vulnerable members of society, including victims of domestic and financial abuse. I guess in terms of our primary responsibilities as a custodian of all this information, is that we're responsible for keeping it accurate and up to date, and it should reflect the facts um, rather than the cause, if you like. And also importantly, keeping the information safe and secure, especially from crooks and other bad actors, to make sure that when information is accessed, it's only done so by the right people and organisations and for the right purposes. One of our jobs as a credit reference agency is to help people see and understand their information, which keeps us very busy. We have a very large customer service centre up here in Nottingham, to help people improve their creditworthiness if, for example, they're on a journey towards an important application like a mortgage or something like that. Or to help people if they've been through something, maybe traumatic like identity fraud or financial abuse, where we, absolutely recognise that we have a role to play helping people deal with the fallout on their credit record. So certainly, we have support available to people who've been through kind of similar experiences to Rosie's.
Can you give some examples as to how you support someone like Rosie?
Yeah, sure. So actually, one of the things we worked on not too long ago was a new credit score guide with working with the charity Surviving Economic Abuse, which is now on our website, because we very much recognise that people in this sort of situation will be on the lookout for helpful guidance on what to do and who to approach and so on. So we're pleased that we worked with the charity and continue to discuss other things we can do to help people in similar situations going forwards. I mean, just personally in this type of situation, the first step really is getting hold of a copy of your information, and we have implemented processes at Experian to help support victims of domestic and financial abuse, particularly when people are understandably keeping their current whereabouts private because of security concerns. So we can, for example, send a copy of someone's credit report to a care of address, or maybe to an advised professional, if that helps give someone peace of mind in relation to kind of potential implications for linking up their old address to their current whereabouts, for example. Once someone's got hold of a copy of the information in question, then obviously we can go through that with the victim and help them understand which entries have been recorded that relate to the abuse, and then what action can be taken to help set the record straight. It's a complicated area, and there are sort of two main scenarios that sort of determine probably the lens through which a lender will look at a request to amend information. One is, if credit was applied for, taken out, or used without the victim's knowledge, permission, then technically that's ID fraud. So that's the lens the lender will look at, and that should result, once queried, in the information being removed from the victim's credit report completely. If, however, credit was taken out or used with the victim's knowledge, but under coercion, that's obviously slightly different. But still, we will work with the individual to raise data disputes in relation to all of the entries on the credit report that relate to the experience, and ask the lenders or other providers to review the situation and to decide whether they think, for example, it's fair to keep recording the information in its current form. I mean, and then obviously the lender has to look at this from a kind of treating customers fairly perspective. What did the individual have the right capacity to contract at the time, that sort of thing. That is very much down to the lender to interpret and decide on the next course of action. As a sort of a keeper of the kind of one of the central registries of credit related information, our primary job is to keep the information, or transpose the information we get from banks and lenders accurately, and keep a factual record of the credit that people have. The information from banks and lenders about the credit that we all use on a regular basis for a variety of purposes is technically owned by the banks and lenders. They register it with us. They're responsible, therefore, for it being an accurate record of what happened. So we do have to rely on the say-so of the banks and lenders in terms of when information is disputed and if it can be amended or even deleted from someone's credit report. So ultimately, if if an organisation comes back and says, and actually we think it should stay recorded, then we will implement that decision. But that's not necessarily the end of the road for someone, because there are other steps and actions that someone could take. So, for example, if there was a credit card record that included a period of arrears that were incurred, during a period of domestic abuse, but the card firm was adamant the information couldn't be changed, then we could help the individual add an explanatory statement to their credit report to put on record their side of the story and those circumstances, and that would then be provided to any lender assessing the information in the future.
You mentioned explanation. How much weight a lender, in this case a future lender, put weight on explanation by an individual?
Well, lenders, that's a good question. Lenders have to look at the note because it becomes part of the credit report and is attached to the entry or entries it relates to. They should look at it and take it into consideration. It would ultimately be down to the lender carrying out the creditworthiness assessment as to, whether or not it affects the outcome of their decision. So it's essentially it's down to the lender, but they will see it and they should read and take it into consideration.
Inevitably, someone might not be happy with the outcome of the decision made by a credit reference agency. If that is the case, what is the complaint process?
As a kind of FCA authorised organisation, we have a kind of formal complaints process in place for customers that are unhappy with the information on their credit reports or maybe the service that we've provided. So we'll go through a kind of formal complaints process, and ultimately, if someone's not happy with us once we've issued a final response on the matter, then we will signpost someone to the Financial Ombudsman Service for a free arbitration and a ruling really on the situation. I would say, in my experience, from the kind of limited number of financial abuse cases I've personally helped deal with, I've largely seen people being quite happy with the support and advice we've given victims, help to help as far as we can restore their credit records. But it's important, as you say, that there is a clear complaints process in place, and as I've said, ultimately people can escalate their situation to the Financial Ombudsman Service if they're not happy with the help that we've provided.
Experian holds individuals' financial data. In this case, on what capacity does the Information Commissioner get involved?
So if you sort of ask me the question, who regulates credit reference agencies, I'd probably answer a combination of the FCA and the ICO. Of course, the ICO monitors, polices, amongst other things, compliance with the Data Protection Act and the and GDPR. So as an organisation that processes lots of personal information, we are obviously closely monitored our activities by the ACO, and we work them on a number of fronts. One example I can give you is we already talked about notices of correction. That's a statement that someone can add to their own credit report to add extra information. The legislation stipulates that a notice should obviously it should be factual. It shouldn't be frivolous. It shouldn't be defamatory or obviously incorrect for any other reason or unsuitable. If someone asks us to add a notice of correction to a credit report and we don't think it's actually suitable, we will probably usually redraft the statement and ask the customer whether that's acceptable. If ultimately we can't agree on the wording, we then have a process to refer the matter to the Information Commissioner's Office as per the regulations. So that's one example of where we would work with the ICO, and then the ICO would basically review the situation and make a ruling based on what they think is the most appropriate wording to use.
Let me bring in Sharina. Sharina, you've been in the advice sector for many years. You've heard what Rosie has said. What sort of issues do individuals of domestic abuse bring in front of you?
Hi, Ripon. Thank you for having me on. We have quite a lot of clients that come to our door on a regular basis. They do suffer financial abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse. Unfortunately, financially, a lot of our victims don't actually realize what's happened until they separate and letters come to them in their own name, in the new address. And that's when they'll come to us in blind panic, sometimes very stressed after a few days of worrying nonstop. And then it's up to us to deal with those inquiries. And sometimes they have very little information about the letters that they've received. They don't even know what it's all about. They don't know anything about agreements, loan payments, anything like that. They don't know where they are in this situation.
You've heard what Rosie said about she going to various agencies. Some are good, some are not. But what is the expectation of advice services when you have someone like Rosie?
So one of the first things we do is try and understand what's happened so far and who's supported the victim up till that point. A lot of our clients usually separate and then come to us for advice. So we'll do a generalist triage, we'll do a housing check, we'll do a benefits check, we'll do an income maximization, we'll support the client into making applications for benefits if that's what they need to do. We'll do a change of circumstances if they're in a joint claim. We'll look at overpayments. We'll talk about all the different ways that they can now get support. We'll do a credit check. So that would be the debt advisor's role. So they'll do a credit check. We'll talk about how to the housing situation and how to get the name out of tenancies and what they need to do with council tax. There's so many things that we do need to discuss with the client, and then get the right support for them in different ways. It's up to the individual how much support they want from us, and sometimes we can't provide all the different support. So we're very lucky right now. We have debt advisors. For about 2 years in Limehouse Project, we didn't have debt advisors, so we'd have to signpost our clients. And that's quite difficult when you've already done quite a lot of the work, but then you have to stop at a certain point and then refer the client on to someone else, a complete stranger, and they sometimes don't want to go to another centre. So that's always quite difficult to do. And I recognise when Rosie said there are some advisors that are quite good, some advisors that are not very supportive, and it's also experience as well. You know, a lot of the advice agencies might not have the right experience, and domestic violence is one of those specialist areas.
To support vulnerable individuals suffering from domestic abuse, what sort of challenges would you come across to support them?
We have a large community that don't speak English as a first language. So the language barrier is quite a big issue for us. We have cultural barriers as well. So a lot of the things we say to victims, they have to think about the community that they live in. They have to answer to family members. A lot of other stuff is more important than what we say to them. So it's not always as black and white as we want things to be. And especially when they do come to us, they are looking for quick answers. They want to go home and rest and be able to sleep, and they want all of it taken away. And sometimes the process is so long, so difficult. The answers are not always there. Even after we've made a few phone calls, we may be able to give the client a bit of breathing space, but actually the problem's not gone away. And we sometimes, the worst thing we always do for our clients is we sometimes make the situation a lot worse, because we'll do a credit check and suddenly we now have to tell the client, actually, you don't have one loan, you have 6 loans, or you're in this much debt, or you've got, your £250 debt is actually 250 something, £2,000 over what you actually thought. We actually sometimes make the whole situation a lot worse for them at the beginning, but then it's, giving them the answers, giving them ways that this is how we're going to deal with this is what we're going to do. And you've just put this person, this person has to go home with a whole brand new set of information that they didn't know about at the beginning. That's a very familiar topic and a very familiar inquiry that we have here.
Fuel costs are going up, we're seeing cost of many other things going up, and no doubt lawyers are also saying that due to this crisis, requests for divorce is also going up. In your professional experience, what do you need to see from the government?
It's difficult for the government at the moment, since they can't even do anything about the cost of living for the normal person. When it comes to domestic violence, I want them to prioritize. These are human beings who are responsible for young children, who have a lot of other issues to deal with. What we've seen over the years is laws have been made, but they haven't been followed, and there are no consequences for people who break those laws. When people come to us and they crying their eyes out about how much abuse they've faced, but they know that their stress hasn't ended, they will still go through ongoing financial abuse. Although the perpetrator might not be in front of them and might not be taking their money, they are still abused a lot longer than when it says it's stopped on paper or something like that. We need the government to recognize that these clients need long-term support. There needs to be a lot more funding. There needs to be a lot more investigations. But more than anything, there needs to be punishments in place for people who carry out these like crimes. These are crimes. These are crimes against these victims, and there needs to be consequences for that. But more than anything, we need funding. We need specialized domestic violence advice agencies for these type of inquiries.
We are coming to the end of Debt Talk. Before we go, I would like our panelists to give some tips to our listeners. Rosie, what tips would you give to those who are affected by domestic abuse?
I think the tips that I would give people that are going through domestic abuse, for instance, would be to, don't give up. There is light at the end of the tunnel. It does take a long while to overcome that and get through the financial elements of it. But like for my instance, the repossession took 2 years. It's on the market now. But once that's done and that's finalised, that will be me free. So there is like the end of the tunnel. Credit scoring in itself, yeah, okay, I can't get another mortgage, I can't rent, I can't get a phone contract out in my own name, I can't do anything. But it's not a prison sentence, and it will get better in time. And I think for people that have clients that are going through domestic abuse, to make sure that they listen, that they understand, that they record it properly, and then they actually, act and have things in place like domestic abuse policies that they can refer to help their clients rebuild their life.
We ask the same question to James. James, what tips would you give to our listeners?
I guess just to know that help is available when you're able to reach out and ask for it. And certainly, Experian, we have implemented policies and support, recognizing the problem of domestic abuse very much out there, so that if people do get in touch, we're set up to do our very best to help people as sort of quickly and painlessly as possible. But as Rosie said, sometimes these things can take time. If you've got kind of property to sell and joint accounts to resolve and that sort of thing, it's not necessarily going to be an overnight process. But we'll do our best once those sorts of things have been resolved, to help get someone's credit report updated, and where information can't be completely removed, to help people put their side of the story on the record, so that information can be accessed and understood by a prospective lender in the future.
And finally, with Sharina.
For me, it's an extremely scary and confusing time for money management, and there's a lot of new support as well as old support available. I would suggest everyone go for an individual advice session with an advisor, get a little checkup. We run money management sessions here, so we talk about I'm doing air quotes, but what a normal financial situation should look like, what money should be coming in, what money should be going out. And in these sessions, a lot of people have walked away thinking, well, you know what, that's not my household. It's not, well, if I'm getting this money, where is this money? That kind of thing. So go access those services, have those conversations, see where it takes you, because a lot of the times when we think we know things, we might need a few things just to support us on the way. No harm in getting that support, no harm in getting that help.
I would like to thank our panelists, Rosie, James, and Sharina, for taking part on this month's Debt Talk podcast. If you have enjoyed listening to Debt Talk and you want to contribute to this show, you can get in touch with me. My email address, ripon.ray@yourdoctordebt.com, or in Twitter, yourdoctordebt. You can also find Debt Talk on Spotify and iTunes and on yourdebt.com website. Please do subscribe. Next month on Debt Talk, the subject matter we'll be dealing with is heating or eating during the cost of living. Thank you for listening to Debt Talk with your host, Ripon Ray.